Our theme song. Welcome to Love at First Right. I'm Victoria Doherty. I am a blogger and a fiction writer, a historical fiction writer, excuse me there. Having managed several technical issues at once. I'm a blogger and historical fiction writer, a historical thriller writer, actually, who is now endeavoring to write a great epic romance. And this week, I want to talk about the lovers. I'm talking about the lovers at the center of the story that you're writing, and also what makes a compelling relationship, what makes a compelling pair of lovers. Excuse my dog who may be snorting a little bit throughout this. You might hear, it's not me, it's him. It's Barney, and I'll introduce him very briefly, just so that you can put a face with a snort. And isn't he just beautiful? Mwah. He is my love today. So first, one of the things that I really want to tell you about is a woman I met several years ago. Boy, she was such a compelling person, and she, in the time I knew her, actually taught me a great deal about love and life and lovers. Her name was Deena Babbitt, and I don't know how else to describe her except to say that she was famous in Holocaust circles, which seems like a bit of a kind of dubious thing to be famous for, but oh, she was really quite an amazing woman. To give you a little bit of background on her, she was interned in both Terezin and Auschwitz. She was a Czech Jew and an artist. And in Auschwitz, she had painted a mural of Snow White for the children in the children's barracks because she wanted to bring some beauty into their horrific lives. And she was actually picked then by Joseph Mengele, who was called the Angel of Death, I believe, in Auschwitz. He was a doctor who basically performed medical experiments on the inmates of the concentration camp, and he picked Deena to paint his subjects, forced her to paint his subjects. There really wasn't much choice involved. He was very disdainful of photography, and he had seen her work, which could have gotten her killed, and what she had done in the children's barracks, and was very impressed by her talent, which was considerable. And she spent her life trying to get those paintings back because she felt that they had been painted by her soul's blood. Now, we are talking about lovers here, so I don't want to get too far off track because I did want to give you some information on her though, because she was such an amazing woman. And if you ever want to hear her talk, go to the archives of the Holocaust Museum, because I think she talks for about an hour there, and she's just a wonderful storyteller and so insightful, and such a person of depth and experience, and such an artist as well. And I think you would really enjoy listening to her. But I remember her telling me about the love of her life. He was a man that obviously she had met when she was young. She had known him through the war, and they both were interned in different concentration camps. I think they started out in the same one, but somehow they were separated. And he was truly the love of her life, and he did survive the war, but just barely. I think he died just a couple of days after liberation, which is a tragedy in and of itself. Now, one of the things that you could do in times like those, in times of extreme distress, was if you could write, or if you had a witness, you could say, I would like to say that this person is my wife or my husband, and that they are my closest kin, and I leave them my body and all my worldly possessions. And as he lay dying shortly after liberation, this is exactly what he did. He, with the last strength that he had, he wanted to write it personally. He wrote her a letter, and it was a letter testifying that she was his wife, though they, had never married, and that he had nothing to leave her, no material goods because they had been stolen from him by the Nazis, but that he was leaving her all he had, which was his body, and that he wanted no one else to have. Well, it's emotional. To have that, to have the decision making power to decide how he was to be honored and buried in his death. And in the letter he wrote that he was stretching his claws, and he needed to write to her. And apparently chickens, when they die, they stretch their claws, and so that's what he was referring to. And it was some sort of inside joke between the two of them. And she treasured this letter for the rest of her life. And and she was this beautiful woman. She had certainly had very sort of harrowing experiences with other men, and other men had sacrificed a great deal for her. She was very compelling. But this man was special to her. This man was everything to her, and he was the love of her life until the day of her death. She was 95 years old, I believe, when she died. And it didn't just never forget him, but lived their time together over and over again in her mind, and savored it in every possible way for all of her life, even though she was married and she had children, and she certainly had other loves and men, as I said, that she did love very much, but this was different. And as writers, every time that we endeavor to write a romance, I think, even if we're not writing a romance, even if we're just writing a story that has a romance in it, I think that the most powerful of those stories have within them a relationship like this, a relationship that somehow we can paint as standing out, as being special, as for whatever reason, these two people have recognized something in each other and are perhaps from the first, but maybe it's something that grows in the relationship, but are willing to do anything for one another as a result of that. Part of it is that sort of spark of recognition. Part of it is passion, bodily passion, and that connection. But those fade, and so I think that it can't, of course, just be that. It's sort of like jumping from rock to rock over a wild river, I think, in terms of building that kind of relationship. The first boulder that you jump onto, or first rock that you land on, is perhaps passion, attraction, a sort of sexual, sensual connection that you feel with this person. And perhaps the second one is kinship, maybe friendship, maybe you find that you have things in common. And I also think that a very, very big part of it is a common value or common values. And I think that cannot be underestimated. There's a wonderful quote by Anne Morrow Lindbergh where she says, "It's not enough to look into one another's eyes. You must look out and see the same horizon." I know in my experience, that's certainly been the case. I've been in love with men other than my husband, but there was no one with whom I really had that sort of shared vision, that shared value, where we saw the same horizon. And that is a very challenging thing to paint as a writer, finding those values that bind these characters together in a way that it doesn't bind them to other people, perhaps, even if those other people are worthy, and and make for good partners. I think of Dr. Zhivago. It's a story that I often come to, and one of the things that I think is difficult for me with Dr. Zhivago in terms of calling it a romance, for one, because it doesn't have a happy ending, which romance is the romance genre. It has to have a happy ending, right? But it's also because the main love affair is an extramarital affair, and that's tough for a romance. Now, one of the reasons why I think it is forgiven in Zhivago is because of the extreme historical circumstances that these characters find themselves in. I mean, even Zhivago's wife, who we also love, as readers and watchers of the film, um, is understanding of what has happened, because their circumstances were so extreme, and extreme circumstances sometimes, not even sometimes, always, always create extreme reactions, and extreme forgiveness, perhaps, extreme hatred, perhaps, extreme love. And I think extreme circumstances are extremely helpful in a romance, because I think it helps create those shared values. And so anyway, in Dr. Zhivago, where here you have Zhivago, who obviously shares a value with his wife. She's a wonderful person. They have a child together. They grew up together. They share a family together. There could be nothing more valuable than that. But what he and Laura share is something that goes even beyond family, which is almost hard to fathom, because some would say there's nothing beyond family, or there's very little beyond family. But um, in in my interpretation, I think they share a spiritual connection, and I don't just mean an attraction because they get along very well or something like that. I mean, they see the same spirits in the world. They see the same. They they are both in touch with that underlying special something that is the heartbeat of the universe, and it's something they hear together. And it's something that they even resist. I mean, in terms of their attraction to one another, they both resist it. Neither one of them want to give into it. And that is also what makes their relationship so compelling, because these are two very good people. And Laura would never say to him, "Don't go back to your wife." In fact, she says just the opposite. "Please go back to her. Please don't come here again. We can't do this." And when she and Zhivago's wife actually do meet, they are both very gracious to one another, which is what makes the story all the more compelling. And so, it is not just what is happening between the lovers. Their value also, it affects those around them. It, I think many times, I reflect upon relationships, that have made me sit up and take notice. I mean, in my own life, not just in literature, but also in literature. And they're not just about the two people who are involved. They tend to have a real effect on the people around them. The people who know them still talk about their wedding, let's say, or talk about the way they interact with one another, and sort of, um, they can inspire anything from awe to jealousy, um, to sorrow, but whatever it is, they inspire very, very deep emotions in the people around them. And so I think that when painting our lovers in a romance, we must not just be aware of what's going on between the two people. I mean, yes, that is primary. Their love scenes must sparkle, they must ooze longing and sensuality and passion and attraction. Their non-love scenes, their interpersonal scenes must show connection and spark. And, these two people, you know, they've got to contend with one another, not just, exist together, not just fall in love, not just become friends. But, I think that when we really fall in love with someone, it's someone with whom we contend. This is someone who brings out the best in us, sometimes brings us to that place kicking and screaming, and brings out very strong emotions in us in general, and forces us to confront ourselves. And so, yes, the lovers must have that. That is the core of 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 what is going on in the story. But then we have to look outside of the lovers as well in order to make it all come together. We must see how these lovers affect those around them. What are people saying? How are they watching them? What are their reactions to them? What would they say about them when they're not in the room? And what actions does the relationship between these two people cause? What events does it spark, or soothe, or even set on fire? Um, Relationships are that way, I believe. I think that they can have a tremendous lingering effect, even intergenerational effect. I will tell one more story, and then this will be it. But I think that it's really uh, quite important for this topic and this week. But one of my readers wrote to me. This was a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. I wrote an essay about love, and I posted it on my blog. And she wrote to me and said, the gold standard in my family were my grandparents. And, they were from an arranged marriage, as was common then. And I think her grandmother got married when she was 16, and maybe her grandfather was 20, 21 at tops. And she said, her grandmother always told the story about how, so she married this guy she didn't even know, and she was just terrified of him. I mean, she really did not enjoy leaving her family home and moving in with this stranger. Uh, every time he came in a room, she just jumped. She was terrified of him. She would hear him walking around the house, and she couldn't stand it. And he would leave for work in the morning, and she would just burst into tears, and she would spend her whole day in tears doing her housework, and she would try to pull it together when he came home, and then she would cook and do all the things that she was supposed to do, and she would just sort of barely collapse into bed every night after having these harrowing days. um, and one day she had a revelation where she realized, this can't be a picnic for him either. I mean, here, he didn't choose me any more than I chose him. He has had to move in with this strange woman, and he's having to take care of her. He's now responsible for her, and we're supposed to have a family together. And here he has this weepy bride who jumps every time he walks into a room. And this can't be any fun for him either. And so she decided from that moment on that everything she did for him, she was going to do with as much love as she could muster. Whether it was sew his button, whether it was cook his meals, or make him a cup of tea, she just reached within herself and did it with every possible scrap of love that she could muster. And over a very short period of time, they fell deeply in love. And they remained in love for the rest of their lives. I mean, this woman who wrote to me said that, they would still, in their 80s, they were still holding hands and gazing into one another's eyes, because they were still doing, he reciprocated it, obviously, and they were still doing everything they possibly could for one another with as much love as they could possibly, draw on from within themselves. And what was so incredible about it was that they passed this on to other generations. And so that when their, children and grandchildren got married, they would also vow privately to one another, I will do everything I do for you with as much love as I can. And it actually spawned very, very happy marriages in this family, this spirit of doing things for one another with love. So that's what I'm going to leave you with this week. Pondering our lovers and how we can make them compelling, how we can make them love one another with as much love as they possibly can. What are those revelations that they come to that makes them fall in love? How do others view those revelations? What can we do to make that come alive? Thanks.